Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order a City Council workshop, August 21st, 2019, approximately 5:05. And Courtney?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we're going to go through the final draft documents for our resiliency project. Our latest one was Stetson University and Florida Sea Grant. We have gone through, this is our 11th year in resiliency planning. So we've gone through 2 grants so far. We did a sea level rise initial assessment back in 2010, and Dr. Parkinson was one of our, the person who did the report during that time, and that was one of our first glances at sea level rise. And then we went on to do a larger vulnerability study with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and that was a grant through DEP. And now we have gone to another phase where we're looking at really a storm-related impact vulnerability analysis. And then we did an assessment of all our critical infrastructure. And then we went through a pretty big policy rewrite of our comprehensive plan, and we'll be looking at further adjustments to our land development regulations to adopt a lot of these policies into our code. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on me because I want to give a lot of time to our presenters. So I'm going to ask Dr. Jason Evans to come up and present the first half of the presentation, and this has to do with really the data and analysis. And he's going to kind of walk you through all of the things that Stetson University did. And then after that, we're going to have Thomas and Rupert and Aaron Deedy come up and present the planning and policy recommendations. And I also believe, and there she is, Tara McHugh with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council is also here, and she'll be available to answer questions and kind of walk you through some of the policy recommendations as well. Go ahead.
All right, guys. Well, thank you.
You can stand up there if you
want.
Okay,
can I talk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably a lot easier.
That's what this one was. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. This project has been really fascinating. It's kind of taken all sorts of twists and turns with hurricanes, and this is just a wonderful community to work in. So what's interesting about your community is that you have been planning for sea level rise probably longer than just about any community in Florida. Which is really kind of forward thinking, because now you really can't if you listen to the news all the time now, that's all anyone's talking about along the coast. This has really become a big issue, and it's become really mainstream. So just kind of go past this here. So now we've got this work that we've done over the past 3 years. And so we really got into the nitty gritty, looking at your infrastructure, doing a lot of really, really detailed assessments, looking at your stormwater. And so really getting into fine grained of now we can kind of make recommendations of things that you can actually do. So I've been working all up and down the southeast coast over the past 8 or 9 years, and just want to kind of assure you guys that you're not alone. That there are communities, and these are just communities that I've worked in. And so this is maybe about 12 communities or so. And these issues are becoming very, very serious. And you guys are right at the front line. So basically, when we're talking about climate change and sea level rise, the national policies kind of move back and forth, the state policy as well. But local governments, because you have to deal with things like drainage and infrastructure and fire stations and police, you're right at the front lines. And so there's a whole community of local governments that are doing the same thing as you, trying to figure this out. And so what is very interesting about you guys here in this community is you actually have language right within your comprehensive plan that actually defines, okay, what are you going to plan for in terms of looking at sea level rise, and we're going to talk about this some more as well. So there's lots of planning curves for looking at sea level rise, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these right now, but what tends to happen is as we learn more, the ranges tend to go up. And with that said, I'm often asked, how much is the sea going to rise? Right? as a scientist. And so you get angry people doing things like this. Exactly how much is the sea going to rise? And then what we know right now is if we actually look at the tide gauges. So you've actually got a tide gauge that's not too far from here. It's up at, it's right at the Cape. It's Trident Pier. And so we can go back. It starts in about 1994, and we can look at the three different curves here of the Army Corps of Engineers. And so this is the low curve, which would basically amount to about 9 inches if we go up to 2100. This is the medium curve here, the intermediate curve, which would be about 2 feet once we go up to 2100. And this is the Army Corps High, which is the one that you guys are using for your planning right now, which would be about 5 feet when you go up to 2100. What we see right now is we're really early within these curves. And so if we look at the tide gauge, it kind of goes up and down. Here more recently, we had some big spikes. And you can see there's this, there's an up and down that just happens kind of naturally. We expect that this is going to increase. We actually see some tendency of kind of an exponential increase, but exactly how much, we don't exactly know. And why is that? Well, for one, again, we can look at the tide gauges, and they do tell us that the sea is rising. There's a lot of noise within these tide gauges right now. It really comes back to looking at the greenhouse gas emission scenarios. And so if we look at the science really closely, the more that we release in terms of greenhouse gases, the higher the probability is that we're going to be on the high end of these curves. And so oftentimes I'll get asked to say, well, let's not talk about greenhouse gases, but to make sense of what's happening with sea level rise, you really cannot, there's no way you can take that out of the conversation. So what I always say, I always use this kind of analogy here, is when we're thinking of sea level rise, it's about risk. And so on the one hand, you might have something like a garden shed. The garden shed, you're probably not going to plan for a lot of sea level rise, I wouldn't think. But something like a nuclear power plant, we're very, very risk averse. And so we're going to think about even very, very low probability scenarios, perhaps. What does a local community, for example, like Satellite Beach, it's going to be somewhere in between, and it's going to be various assets, right? So something like a fire station, we don't have a lot of risk tolerance. Something like a garden shed or like a tool shed, we might have more, let's say. Okay, so when we think about sea level rise and we think about impacts, what happens with infrastructure, the things that get impacted first are the things that are underground, right? So things like stormwater systems, things like wastewater systems. And I'm going to go ahead and just assert that you're already seeing that here in Satellite Beach, okay? Your stormwater systems, we already know that they're already seeing impacts, even from just the amount of sea level rise we've seen over the past 40, 50 years when a lot of this infrastructure was built. The folks that were actually doing all that, the engineers were not dumb. They were very intelligent, but they weren't thinking about a rising seas. And then also think about your wastewater infrastructure. I know very unfortunately we oftentimes hear on the news that there are wastewater spills that happen right here in Satellite Beach. And I'm also going to assert at least part of the reason why that's happening is because you've got the groundwater coming up, the salt water coming up, and a lot of that infrastructure was not built with that in mind. And so it's causing that infrastructure to have a lot of impacts that were just not intended. And so when we see things like wastewater spills here, at least there's at least some component of that that has to do with what we're seeing with sea level rise. And so if we think about stormwater, right, so a lot of the stuff that was built here in Satellite Beach was built back in the 1960s and 1970s. Back before we had things like the Clean Water Act. And so we've got a lot of pipes that go right out into the IRL. And the idea was when it was built, basically the water level was down below the pipe for the most part. As the sea comes up, you start getting the water coming in the pipes. And then it rains. What happens to these pipes? If there's water in there, if there's all kinds of debris, things like barnacles can grow in there, it's just not going to drain as fast. It's just, so that's what happens. Then you'll end up with something like this. Over time, for example, in Southeast Florida, we'll see this in Miami. It's in the news where the water will come out the other end. And oftentimes, this is when communities will start to plan, is when it's not raining outside. You look at, there's a drain, a stormwater drain, and the water's coming out the wrong way. What happens in that case is basically people freak out. because why is there water in the streets and it's not raining? And once you're at that stage there, the fixes become very expensive. Okay. Okay, so what we did here, right, so Satellite Beach. You guys have a wonderful master plan for your stormwater. You also have pack rats as well, kind of public works. We spent a lot of time over there in public works with Bert. He saved all of the surveys that go back to at least the 1970s. And this is the kind of thing that is just a treasure trove. You would be surprised at communities that don't have that information. That oftentimes when you're trying to map your stormwater, it's all up in here. It's all up in someone's head. And then I was like, well, it's great, but what happens if you get hit by a bus, right? And then the next person's not going to have that. So what we did is we basically took the data that was out there and so it was kind of messy at first with what we like to do with GIS. And so one of my students right here, she spent hours and hours and hours going through your data and she cleaned it up, right? So we've got this beautiful, beautiful GIS system. And where's Nick? Here, so he's got this data. And then what we can do with this data is we can get really fine grained. So we've got lots of elevation data for each one of the infalls and outfalls, and then we can use that data to basically predict where is the water going to go. And then I'd say the secret about doing this work is as long as you know what the elevation is, if the water is here, then there'd be that much depth. It's really not that hard to do once you have all the information. The hard thing is getting all the information. That's really the it takes a lot of time. Here's what it looks like in terms of your infrastructure that's owned by the city. The IRL, as you probably know, the water levels here are very interesting in terms of the tides, that there's not really a tide. It's more like a seasonal tide. And so trying to figure out even what is the water level, what is the sea level for the Indian River Lagoon is not a trivial task. And so we basically pieced together some water level data. So I know you worked on this, Randy. You actually did some work about 10 years ago getting some water level data. The DEP installed a tide gauge as well up at the 192 bridge, and then so we used that. That was functional for about 4.5 years, and then it kind of fell apart after a while. So we used that. That's what we see here, and I'm not going to go in all these details here necessarily. It's that we can look at the water level data and know that we see about a 1 foot rise that happens in the fall. Just on average. And we also see annually, about 1 day per year, the water rises about 1.5 feet above what would be your mean sea level, right? And so that might be a windstorm or something in the fall, but that happens about on average, about 1.5 feet higher. And it also shows, if we piece together various forms of data, we see on the Indian River Lagoon side about 3.5 to 4 inches of sea level rise since about 1992, which conforms with what we see at the tide gauge. Very, very close relationship there. So it's real. It is actually happening here, and we can actually see that, right, if we piece this together. And so what we did here is we can take all this data that we collected and we can look at your stormwater systems and basically make estimates of where the water is going. So basically the water is going to backflow into your stormwater systems if there's nothing there to basically prevent it from going in. And that's what these maps show. Right? There's a lot to show here, of course, and really kind of look at. But what this shows is that there are certain areas where, yes, certainly the tide water is going pretty far inland. For example, at Cassia in this area here, there's been a lot of stormwater improvements that have happened within these areas. And why is that? Why have there been issues? Well, because there's water pressure coming in from the IRL, right? And then if we go through, and this is not really rocket science, right? And so what happens when the water, once it goes up, for example, in 2040, just that pressure goes further inland, okay? And we go up to 2070, we see again, it just goes further and further inland. The areas that really don't have the impact are right along here, kind of A1A. So this is, of course, your high ground. And then, as you all know here, that you got the dune that kind of slopes to the west, right? So the major impacts from sea level rise in Satellite Beach are right along here in this area, right? So right here, exactly where we're standing, okay? We also ran this tool, HAZUS. So this is a tool that FEMA uses, and it's oftentimes used to do a lot of planning for looking at things like critical facilities and fire stations. And this is really extreme events, so looking at 100-year storms. And what we did is we ran HAZUS, just looking at what's happening now with 100-year storms and also looking in the future, right? So what happens if we have a 1.5 feet of sea level rise? What happens if we have 5 feet of sea level rise? And we got really fine grained. So we actually looked at your structures and we looked at each one of your assets, right? So your fire stations, your police station, looked at those assets. One of the interesting things that we found when doing this has to do with the FEMA flood zone maps, and this confuses people because these are actually two different products that we actually get from FEMA. One is the flood insurance rate map, and if we look at Satellite Beach with the existing flood insurance rate map, which is in the process of being updated, but very little of the city is actually in the 100-year floodplain, which I have to admit really surprised me when I was like, is this correct? Did I get the right map? And yes, it is correct, at least. Then we ran HAZUS, and we ran 100-year flood with HAZUS, and we got this. And I have to admit, I've never seen anything quite like this, where these things totally diverged. And we had calls with some of the FEMA folks trying to understand why there was this wide divergence. And we were extremely worried going in front of the public and talking about this, and then, this is not the same. And what we came up with is that with the firms, the flood insurance rate maps, it's insurance, and that has to do with property. These have to do with human life, right? So HAZUS is used when you're doing things like evacuations, when you're going to site something like a fire station, you're thinking about like first responders. So this tends to be risk averse, right? I again have to admit, I've never seen it really have this much of a, this is unusual. I would, if you ask me as a scientist, that I'd say this is probably exaggerating the case. I'd say the flood insurance rate map is far too conservative. I would argue for Satellite Beach, and I think maybe the evidence there is there's a lot of people in Satellite Beach that don't have to buy flood insurance.
65% of the policyholders.
Yeah, that do anyway, okay, because they're smart, right, because there's risk. So this is again the most extreme case that I've ever seen. So I use this all the time trying to teach about the flood insurance program and why we have issues. The other thing about flood insurance rate maps, they do not consider climate change or sea level rise explicitly. They do not look at your local stormwater infrastructure conditions. They don't do that. They just don't. This big issue, and so this is kind of a national policy scale, but I always, whenever I talk with local governments, I talk with planners, I talk with floodplain coordinators, and they say, well, this isn't in the 100-year floodplain. I'm like, floods don't look at those maps. They really don't. Okay. And then even if you talk to FEMA, they would say, don't use that as your only tool, right? You're not supposed to use it as your only tool. So the National Flood Insurance Program is notoriously in the red. I just have to get that out there. And there's a lot of coastal property that's exposed. And this is, again, a big issue just thinking about sea level rise. And you guys are right in the front lines of all this here, right? You're kind of a microcosm. Why is it important to do what you're doing here, right? So Moody's, the ratings agencies, and so maybe Satellite Beach has taken some heat in the past. Why are you planning for sea level rise? Why are we wasting money on this? Well, the ratings agencies are saying if you don't do this, we're going to downgrade your bonds. And so now the financial impetus has gone the other way, that communities that are planning, the ratings agencies say, okay, you don't have your head in the sand. So this is really critically important stuff. And so I'm just going to go kind of quickly through this. So we looked at a lot of your facilities, but the one that I think is the most important here, I just want to tell this story, of course, was the fire station. And where's John Stone? So John Stone came to me back in July 2017 and said, you know, we're thinking about doing an upgrade on the fire station, but maybe we should move it, and maybe we should do some kind of investigation. I'm like, yeah, we can go do that. So we went out, and again, your fire station, at least as of right now, is not in the floodplain, right? It's not in the floodplain, even though, what's interesting, this isn't in a floodplain either, and it's flooded. I mean, so when you're looking at your firms, be careful. And so we went out and then used lots of elevation data. I went out there with my own little machine, actually got some high-quality elevation. Then we looked at the HAZUS results, and HAZUS put 4 feet of water inside your fire station. And then that's something that we never want to see. That's not, and I actually talked with the old fire chief, and he's like, I don't believe it. I don't know if I believe it either, but this is the FEMA tool that we use for fire stations. And so, and then we came up with a date for me to come here. Last time I was in this room, this is what it looked like with Irma, and so it was kind of a charged event that night. And like, yeah, you might want to move your fire station. And fortunately, Irma didn't hit here. It wasn't what this map shows. But of course, Hurricane Harvey was in the news, and I actually talked with your fire chief, who had actually gone out to Houston, because he'd asked me, what is the scenario that would flood the fire? I'm like, maybe 30 inches of rain, you know, a lot of wind coming in for days at a time. And he's like, that never happened. And then it happened, right? Of course, not here, it's in Houston, but it could happen here. And so you don't want your fire station at that kind of risk. So I know you're, what, about 5 years out with the fire station? I was just talking with John, and so the new site is actually higher and drier, and so I just want to just applaud you guys for, that's a really big decision, and that's something we use. I use this all over the place to say, here's a city that's actually walking the walk, right? They're using information to make decisions, and it's great. Yeah, so with that, so I go, I think I'll stop there, and I'm going to hand it over, let's see, is it Aaron and Thomas next? Great. And any questions you guys have for me? Are we waiting until after? But this is fine.
I think
right
we were
now?
going to, if you have any specific questions to his data, then I would go ahead and ask while your, you know, mind is fresh.
I don't have a question. I just have a statement. I think that the one slide that you had up there that talked about the storm water and water coming up and why that's important in the flood maps, because even though we're not in a flood zone, water is going to come back up that system. And
That's right.
what's going to be the hazard that you're talking about with the fire station and other, you know, homes and businesses that are in those areas. So that's an important facet to look at when you're looking at these slides.
Sure, absolutely. And that's just an issue that we're trying to get this out all over the state to really kind of look at what's happening to stormwater systems. And again, you guys are really at the front lines where with your stormwater master plan, we use this as as the example for other communities that this is what we need to be doing. Because if we're not, then saying, okay, we're not in the flood zone. When it rains really heavily and it floods someone's house and they're not in the flood zone, you know, that those maps don't matter.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we were just had a meeting today. We did our stormwater master plan 2 years ago, and we met today to begin the process of updating it again for flood attenuation issues that we're already experiencing that we had not experienced 2 years ago. So the data that Jason provided where you see the pipes that sit in the water, they're actually sitting in the water, that also affects sewer and water pipes as well. But the stormwater pipes are our concern. Our main concern is for our agency, and that reduces the capacity of your flow. So that's something that we have to think about when we're replacing pipes and making sure that our residents and streets don't flood. So that's some of the challenges. Not only do we have a higher intensive rains, but our pipes are being inundated as well from underground. So that's further reducing the capacity of the flow.
Mark?
Just one question. You said since 1992 or 94, the Indian River has raised 3 to
But
4 inches? Is that
That's
what-
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
92 or 94?
So 1992, and then, the tide gauge was installed in 1994, so we only have that information back to 1994, but, in 1992, we use that as our standard kind of starting point when we're thinking about sea level rise, and then, so there is a 1992, 0 point that NOAA has actually established for the Indian River Lagoon.
So you think that that'll kind of extrapolate at the same rate over the next 20, 30 years, or at a higher rate? I'm just trying to figure out what those projections are, along with the change in climate and all that sort of thing.
That's right.
What could we expect inches wise over the next 10 years? Just a guesstimate.
We expect it to accelerate.
Okay,
And
so-
so over the next, 10 years or so, another inch and a half, I would say, is probably what we can expect. And then as we get further out, these curves really, even if we only experience, 2 feet of sea level rise by 2100, that's still going to be a pretty substantial increase that's going to happen. If we end up with 5, then by 2060, for example, we'd have close to 2 feet of sea level rise within this area. So we do anticipate those to accelerate. And we'll know more, and this is always the classic thing here, is that once we get more data over the next several years, we're going to be able to kind of narrow that range. But right now, the range is really, really high in terms of what we can say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain to me what 2 feet of sea level rise would look like on our beach right now? Taking what the beach looks like right now, what would we look at as a loss, or where would that move the dune lines? And let's say there was no restoration or anything done at the beach side.
That's a really complicated question. I know we've got a crystal geologist, Parkinson,
Maybe I'll see that
who
for
could,
you.
he could probably speak to that.
Well, maybe on the river side, could we expect? So we're really promoting like the natural shorelines, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Are they going to be under more duress than a seawall dealing with sea level rise, for example? So I guess that's my question. So we're trying to save the lagoon by having natural shorelines, but what will that affect in the long run for the homeowners?
That's a really great question. And so for the lagoon side, so 2 feet of sea level rise, what we'd expect is that pretty much any of the salt, say mangroves, that they would want to move inland, and whether or not they could keep up and move upwards is questionable with that amount of sea level rise. It would just really depend upon the rate at which that was to happen. There are models that we can kind of run to kind of make those predictions, but just kind of generally it would just be this encroachment going inland.
Okay.
I'm kind of struggling to think of any kind of natural community that's going to be able to stay in place. I think it's going to want to migrate. Yeah.
So here's my concern. Is this like a bigger picture to consider, because we really are trying to be better with the lagoon. We're trying to do away with the seawalls. We're trying to do these natural living shorelines, but then are we setting our residents up for land loss at a higher rate by doing that?
It depends on how they're built, I think. I mean, if you
Okay.
build them expecting that you're going to have a 2-foot rise in sea level, then you would build it up, to accommodate that. Because, you can make a shoreline, a natural shoreline with riprap and vegetation to be stronger and more effective than a seawall any day. I mean, it depends on how you build it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are seeing examples of these hybrid systems, we call them, where it's kind of eco-armoring is what I oftentimes call it, where it's still going to give you the functionality of something like a seawall, but you're still going to have vegetation and other things where you get natural
Yeah,
communities.
and then that, it's stronger because it's got the natural community in it, but it also addresses pollution with those types of plants in the lagoon.
Which is, I'm not, obviously not at all
And
opposed
that's
to
the
natural
kind of
shorelines,
type
but-
of shoreline that we are actually promoting when we talk about going back to a natural shoreline. It's not completely a sloped, shoreline. That would be an impossibility at this point with our canal system. So we would have to do some type of hybrid situation.
Okay.
Any further? Anything else? Okay, I'm going to hand it over here.
Well, good evening. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think Jason did a great job of setting up just how important some of these issues are and how you've already been working to consider all of this in your process and your decision making. So I think now is the time to move on to the next step, which is really trying to make sure that you've got institutionalized policies that allow you to make the decisions that take that kind of data into account. So just a quick overview. This is actually Aaron Dady. We worked on all this together, so we are going to be kind of tag teaming this presentation. So we're going to be stepping up and back here from the podium a fair bit. But this is an overview of what we want to cover, and I'm just going to jump right in. So first, there were some, as we worked through all this and spent time talking with different city officials and looking at the data and doing some research, we really started to come across some kind of basic goals and principles that informed all the specific policy language that we subsequently developed. Well, the first was obviously using the data that Jason worked with and just talked about, is emphasizing the physical drivers in all of this work on policy recommendations. I mean, it is sea level rise. It is increased intensity of rainfall events and what this is doing to your infrastructure and how it's impacting your residents. We really tried to focus as much as possible on protecting human safety and public health and property from flooding. Those are the things that when courts see data that you've looked at to make decisions to protect those, that's when they tend to give you the most leeway and are least likely to find against you in a lawsuit. And finally, that last bullet, clarifying the local government responsibility for policy decisions. In the past, there have been times when courts, they want to enmesh themselves and essentially doing legislating. And what we really want to do is make very clear here that you're weighing a lot of different policy factors and making these hard policy decisions as a legislative body. That's what your job is. It's not the court's job to do legislation. And so trying to do that. And part of that relates to that last phrase there, no escape. If you're a property owner and your property is impacted by sea level rise, you can walk away. You can't as a local government. You are stuck with the responsibility of your jurisdiction. You can't just walk away, so you have to make some hard choices at times. Another thing that's really informed this is really trying to be as proactive as possible in helping your citizens and people to understand that what you've got today is changing because of climate change and sea level rise, and you need to anticipate further changes coming down the road. We want to ensure, of course, due process for your citizens so that decision-making takes place. They know about it, and they have the right to be informed and participate in that. Otherwise, you're not respecting their due process rights. We want to minimize the risk of moral hazard. This is an idea that I think is going to become really, really important in adaptation to sea level rise. It's the idea, moral hazard is this idea that it comes typically out of the insurance world. And it's the idea that if you have someone who's insured against a loss or a risk, they're less likely to do anything to try to avoid falling subject to that risk or hazard because, well, if it happens, they're insured. And that's this idea of moral hazard, but it's kind of been expanded, and we'll get into that. I'll get into that another point later. And finally, of course, there's going to be a fairly constant need to identify your future data needs as you understand what you're moving towards. So with that, I will turn it over now to Erin.
So currently, state law only requires climate change and sea level rise to be addressed in the coastal management element of the comp plan, which you've done. Additionally, there's a voluntary kind of permissive way that you can establish adaptation action areas, which you've done. And now this is kind of taking all the work that's been happening with the city over the last several years with data collection and modeling and integrating it not only there but in the other elements of the comprehensive plan, just to make abundantly clear where the city is going from a policy perspective. So one of the first things to address is your infrastructure element. Add language into goal 1 of your infrastructure element that considers the fiscal and physical elements of sea level rise and climate change. And this is kind of an undercurrent and a precursor for a lot of the policies that Thomas and I have been working on, that's going to culminate in a balancing test that we're going to kind of talk about towards the end of the presentation. Objective 1.1, including climate considerations within the service life. So if you're planning a pump or you're planning a road elevation project or a new building, you look at how long you expect that infrastructure to be in service, and you want to incorporate what future sea level rise conditions are within that time frame, so you design it appropriately. Policy 1.11, a change to deal with roadway improvements, will be maintained as determined feasible and reasonable. You may not elevate every road to the same level. Not every neighborhood is going to get the same level of service in the future. So you want to give yourself some flexibility and let people know in terms of transparency what they can expect in the long term. Objective 1.2, stormwater management, balancing interests to serve, as Thomas mentioned, health, safety, and welfare, but acknowledging that sea level rise and climate change are going to potentially influence how stormwater is managed in the future. In terms of infrastructure, policy 1.1.13 is a new policy, and this is a really critical one. There's been some case law proximate to this jurisdiction where a local government accepted a dedication for a road from FDOT, which turned out to be a tremendous mistake for that jurisdiction. So the idea is that you don't want to inherit somebody else's problem that's going to create a long-term financial impact to you to maintain infrastructure that you probably shouldn't have accepted in the first place. But this is not going to prevent you from accepting dedications of conservation and green space, just as long as it's not going to create an obligation on the part of the city. It's also not completely preventive in that acceptance of the dedication, as long as that infrastructure meets all of the ordinances and standards and design criteria that you have in place when the day you accept that infrastructure. Policy 1.2.1, adding new language about prioritizing stormwater management, design, and construction based on city policies on sea level rise and climate change. Moving on. I think this is you now. We're switching over to coastal management.
Yeah, we do go back and forth quite a bit here. I think, Aaron, what we're going to mention, we were going to talk about this on the policy 1.2.1, not only doing your stormwater management based on the existing policies, but in addition to the language we add there, I think it's important to know what we take out too. We take out language saying that you're necessarily going to address the worst problems first, because I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges and things that people are not accustomed to going forward with sea level rise is, in the past, usually that you made kind of intuitive sense. Well, you start with the biggest problem and make sure you get that fixed before you move on to the smaller problems. But I think going forward, that is not necessarily always going to be the best approach. Because if you do that, what you could end up doing is spending outrageous sums of money for very large problems in places that you're really, in the long term, and even in the midterm, aren't going to be able to do enough about to justify that expenditure. And that's going to get to be a really hard question for local governments when that starts happening. Yeah. So moving into the coastal management intergovernmental coordination elements. So again, just as with the other elements, kind of the overarching is to make sure that you just put in that all these decisions are now happening in a completely different context, which is adding in these changes of sea level rise and climate change and how that impacts your decision-making processes. With policy, and I guess I didn't say this right at the start, but this whole first segment of the project, of the presentation and in your written documents, this whole first section, we actually developed specific language. This is, strike out, underline language in your printed documents that we're recommending for immediate adoption and use. Part 2 of the report goes into an area where we make recommendations about what to do, but we did not actually create specific ordinance or comprehensive plan language. So I just wanted to point that out as we're going through these policies. Policy 1.4.2, it updates your substantial damage rule. This kind of cleans up and makes everything all on the same page in your comprehensive plan and your ordinance, and also fits well with FEMA standards on substantial damage and improvement. And 1.5.4, we added that as a new policy, and at the same time eliminate policy 1.9.10. And both of these policies relate to buyouts of property. That's been a very big issue. The state of Florida just announced $75 million of funding available for buyouts after Irma. And buyouts come with a lot of challenges. I'm not going to jump into all of them right here, but the one that we want to address here is basically the city would be saying, we are not expecting that we are going to be contributing funds from a local perspective to buyout processes. There are a number of reasons for that. One, obviously, you're a fairly small local government with fairly limited funding. And two, it goes back to that idea of moral hazard and kind of looking at the longer term. Essentially, one of the potential problems with buyouts is what they really do is they create this expectation that, well, hey, I heard about some people that, basically they got wiped out by the storm, then the government came in and they paid them the market value before the storm ever happened, and they paid them a premium on top of that in order to do a buyout. And pretty soon everybody starts thinking, well, why am I going to worry? This property's worth a lot, because if there's ever a problem, well, they have to buy me out, right? And it's really not true, but it creates that misperception in people's heads.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, is it okay to ask questions? Maybe I don't understand it completely, but we want to do a coastal retreat policy. Is this a conflict to that in any way, shape, or
We're
form?
talking about the city ourselves.
Okay.
And so we wouldn't impede the state from doing anything on a statewide level.
Okay.
Yes, and with the current buyouts, some of those are actually being done 100% through outside money, because there's a straight federal component, and then there's CDBG block funding that's being used to put up instead of local funding. So there might be situations in the city would still do it, but according to this policy, you wouldn't be putting in your own money. And I think also it doesn't necessarily conflict with relocation strategies over the longer term, because buyouts themselves are not a feasible strategy in the long term for relocation, because there's not enough money. I mean, you're not going to be able to buy out nobody's going to be able to buy out all the properties that will be subject to hazards. In your coastal management element, 1.14.3, currently you've got listed the IFAAA boundary, or the Inland Flooding Adaptation Action Area, and this is actually a GIS map of points. And what we propose to do, and there's a methodology in your written documents there, is to create an actual usable zone out of that makes it a lot easier for the city to understand, if somebody comes in, when does this apply? Which parcels does it, what if one of those dots touches a parcel? What if there's a parcel in the midst of all that that's surrounded, but there's no dot on that parcel? And so we set up with working with some GIS folks how to do that, use this data as the basis for an actual zone. And then finally, delete policy 1.15.1 on reduction of living units. Overall, there's the possibility that there are going to be times and places you may actually want to increase. You'd certainly want to be careful where, but there might be a time and place for that as part of future adaptation and how you maintain fiscal viability. We look, I guess I covered the first bullet there, I duplicated. Policy 1.2.7. Currently, you basically say after a huge storm event, we are going to fix all the infrastructure. Again, in the past, that tended to make sense. Nobody was thinking about moving out of areas. In the future, there might come times, and well, I would argue there will be times eventually when there might be infrastructure destroyed during a storm that you might not want to necessarily assume that you are going to fix and repair and replace that infrastructure. And now I want to hand this back to Aaron.
So we're now up to capital improvements, and the first one we're going to talk about is Goal 1, and that is obviously to incorporate sea level rise and climate change into the goal for the capital improvements element. The second one is the new objective 1.1, and the idea here is to create a balancing test for public infrastructure decisions. I'm not going to go into the detail of that now because we're going to spend the bulk of the presentation on that towards the end, but the idea is to incorporate future fiscal and physical characteristics of climate change and sea level rise when you are looking at a public infrastructure project, and providing staff some flexibility to make recommendations on whether that is a clear, smart investment of the city. Policy 1.1.3 is requesting the TPO to give priority for traffic facility improvements, but also addressing sea level rise and climate change of both the TPO and city policies. Future land use element and capital improvements element, policy 1.1.4, again tying this back to this new community fiscal and resilience balancing test when you prioritize drainage projects. 1.1.6, aligning funding for capital improvements with plans regarding sea level rise and climate change, so your funding priorities reflect what those planning priorities are. And policy 1.1.9 is really just a cleanup because there's old references to how the 5-year capital improvements process is done, and now we want to key that to consistency with state law. Objective 1.3, again, this is kind of an antiquated concept in Chapter 163 about limiting public infrastructure in vulnerable areas, but we want to update that concept to include also your adaptation action areas and your coastal high hazard areas. Objective 1.4 is managing your debt service to make sure that you have room fiscally in the future to plan for adaptation projects related to sea level rise and climate change. And then the final one, modifying the future land use element, policy 1.2.1, adding, again, considerations for resilience, sustainability, climate change, and sea level rise into your land use policy. And now we're going to switch over to Tom.
So after going through and creating some strike-through underline comprehensive plan language, there were just a couple of places where we actually did the same thing and with your ordinances and proposed these. So we wanted to modify the 3723 to clarify that public access to the beach includes both lateral and perpendicular access, because, I mean, you actually passed, one of the few local governments that actually did manage to pass a law last year in between the time the legislature changed the law on customary use and the time it went into effect. So I know that's of real concern to the local government, to Satellite Beach, and just want to be very clear in your ordinances on that. And the next one there is, again, that move towards living shorelines whenever possible, and this, the way we drafted that, it references the United States Army Corps of Engineers and their nationwide permit 54, which they basically establish certain criteria, and if you fall below those for the Army Corps of Engineers, the permitting is very simple at the national level. So we reflect that in that language. And then we've also discussed minimum floor elevations, and thanks to John Stone, we spent quite a bit of time discussing those, because there were 4 different separate places in your ordinances discussing different ways of looking at minimum floor elevations. And we discussed the idea of moving to a single standard, but of course, this is kind of one of the classic problems in law. The more you try to make regulations reflect the complexity of reality, they become too complex. So you have to simplify at some point. So it would be nice to see the simplicity of a single one, but it wouldn't have fit your city very well. So finally we managed to say, well, we can maybe get it down to these 3. So we basically say, keep what you've recently passed with the coastal high hazard area, everything east of A1A, and keep those, and also the minimum elevation of 10 feet above base flood elevation for buildings there that receive a variance to go closer to the coastal construction control line. And then most places would fall under number 3 there, which is wherever you're at, you need to be the higher of either 7 feet of NAVD 88 or 30 inches above the adjacent street. Because currently it says 18 inches above the crown of the adjacent road. But you've already got roads that, you know, in October and November at high tide, they'll flood. So you're already pretty high, and allowing new structures to go in at a level that's just barely above what can already flood at high tide is not a great idea. So this will help to fix that at least some point. And There are some other things that we're talking about for further development, and again, as I mentioned, we don't have specific language on these. Yeah, we have some there. But anyway, yeah, and this is first to go into that community fiscal and resilience balancing test, and we will get into that in some detail. Again, prioritize more work to prioritize the living shorelines and the inland flooding adaptation action area, and also ensure their maintenance, not just the permitting, but ensure that long-term maintenance liability lies with the property owner in that permitting process. And finally, develop some sort of template for what you would use in permitting and to protect lateral and perpendicular beach access. We also want to focus on providing notice of sea level rise and these expected impacts. I think this is something that I've been talking about for a lot of years, because it not only does it seem fair that you want to try to inform people of what we understand about the future as local government, you have more data than almost anybody else. We need to make sure that people understand and are aware of the knowledge that you have, because it sets their expectations. And that can actually, in the longer term, have potential legal impact on how you do that. And so we want to also provide notice for permit applicants. And one of the ways we could get to the public that you serve is if they come in for a permit, you provide them a specified packet of information with data sources and information. And then they actually sign a paper acknowledging that, yes, I have received that and I have reviewed it, and that goes into the permit file. And that way, again, this is to help protect you as much as possible legally over the longer term. And then we've got a long list here of recommendations requiring further analysis and consideration.
Yeah, level of service is going to be probably a hot topic for local governments here and everywhere. Determining what level of service you can provide with certain types of infrastructure, particularly roadways and stormwater. Looking at the future risk of your existing public facilities. Looking at special assessments. You may not be able to provide that same level of service, but after a certain point, certain property owners may want to take on the elevation of a road or other types of infrastructure, and they may want to assess themselves to do that. Increasing the tailwater elevation, essentially making sure that people are designing their stormwater such that they recognize that they may not have the full ability to gravity flow their drainage wherever it's going to go. Seawall ordinances have been a hot topic with local governments all over Florida. We're going to talk about the balancing test, additional rebuilding limitations and relocation policies, just as you mentioned, the retreat policy, and how does that fit into the future tools that you may have. Noticing for potential purchasers, Thomas just talked about the lateral beach access and the financing the cleanup of non-viable properties. This has been something, I know there's been a lot of policy discussion with Thomas and others, like what do you do when somebody does actually want to leave and want to relocate and their property is particularly vulnerable. So I'm going to jump in to the background on a balancing test. I would say this is the culmination of what, a 6-year conversation that Thomas and I have been having legally about how local governments make decisions about public infrastructure and how to balance those decisions that include economic impacts and what is financially and what you're physically going to be capable of delivering in the future. So what we wanted to do was look at what's called the public interest test within water management district environmental resource permits, or the reasonable beneficial use test when you're permitting utility water supply for consumptive use permits. And the idea is to develop a list of factors to go through that evaluation process to determine whether it makes sense to approve or permit or allow a new infrastructure project. So examples of factors that water management districts use through their uniform criteria for environmental resource permits. They look at whether or not the activity will adversely affect the public health, safety, and welfare or property of others. You never want to transfer a flooding or a drainage problem to somebody else, because ultimately that ends in litigation and nobody's happy except the lawyers. You want to look at the project and what the flow of water will be. Is it going to change the natural flow or attenuation of water? What it's going to do to the shoreline. These are things that are already within the law, within permits that the Water Management District issues for wetland resources and drainage systems. Examples of consumptive use permit factors: not cause harm to existing off-site land uses resulting from hydrologic alterations. Another good idea that you want to look at in terms of flooding infrastructure. So what we did was we took these concepts that are already existing within Water Management District permitting, and we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to develop them for public infrastructure decisions for a local government. And so why would we do that? Well, we pulled these legal principles from Chapter 373, which is Florida's water law. And the reason we use this is there's a lot of supporting law on these. Water management districts have been issuing these permits for a long, long time. And they've been doing these public interest tests and these reasonable beneficial use tests for water resources. So there's a long-term body of law that supports flexibility with these types of factors in staff and local government decision making. So why would we do that? Well, the factors are there, and we can pull them and kind of tweak them. It's prescriptive in that permit applicants will know what staff is eventually looking at, but it's also flexible in that it allows staff to have data submitted to them to make this ultimate decision as to whether or not this is within the public interest or whether it's within the fiscal and resiliency balancing test parameters. But it also includes economic and practical considerations, because that's been a long-term policy discussion, the economics of those decisions and whether or not you permit infrastructure. Is it committing you to something in the future that you may not necessarily be able to spend? Now, right now, the way this is structured is it's really geared towards public infrastructure, but it could be applied to private infrastructure too, in terms of redevelopment of the site. And the bottom line is why we've taken this approach is it's really not new territory. It's just new territory for applying it to local government decision-making on infrastructure versus water management district or DEP type decision-making. So we have a graph. This is probably the prettiest picture that we have in this presentation.
But you can't read it. It's too small to read.
But you're going to walk through it. And
I will try to walk through. So actually, the community fiscal and resilience balancing test is not the whole thing. It's part of this larger flow chart that's up here, and there's a copy of this in your printed materials. But this would be kind of an adaptation ordinance, and this would form the core of it. And so what it says under step 1 up there is the first question would be, when you're looking at infrastructure work, is it routine maintenance? If it's routine maintenance, don't worry about it, just do it. And that's what it boils down to. I mean, if it's things like, painting new lines on the road or grinding off edges on sidewalks that are heaved or something, you're not going to be wanting to get involved in some discussion about sea level rise. But if it's periodic maintenance of infrastructure, and some periodic maintenance can be fairly significant, like say repaving a road. If that road is already subject to sea level rise impact, or would be within maybe say 10, 15, 20 years that you might hope the repaving will last, then maybe it's going to come into consideration, but definitely for all new or redesigned, rebuilt infrastructure. So then under step 3, once you determine that it does apply, that you need to consider sea level rise, you would look at the data on, okay, what is the expected lifespan of this infrastructure in normal circumstances? Now we go out and you look at the sea level rise curve that you've adopted and are currently using, which is the US ACE high, and you look at, well, where does that put us on that curve? And then you go to that step 5. And step 5 is the community resilience and fiscal and resilience balancing test. And that is where essentially it's going to be a 2-part review. First, staff is just going to look at it, and it's kind of like a laugh test. I mean, there can be things that come in the door that somebody might propose, and you're just going to look at it and you say, I don't need data to tell me I know that's not going to fly. That there's no way we can afford that, or there's no way it's going to be feasible. Those get, if staff can clearly make that decision because it's fairly obvious that it's completely infeasible, then they make that recommendation and decision. That happens at a publicly noticed public meeting so that there's due process there, and you don't consider sea level rise and you move ahead. If they determine that, oh, absolutely, we would definitely be able to adjust this considering the sea level rise information we have, again, they can go ahead and make that decision then and move forward that way. But a lot of things are probably going to fall in between those two extremes, and that's when you would then take a second look back at it. And again, just like Aaron said with this idea of a balancing test, doing this kind of two-phased approach is not new either. We've grabbed that from another area of law and applied it here. And it's just this idea that there's sometimes the amount of work that it can be to go through this data for you as a fairly small city with limited staff can be really significant. And if you've got a small infrastructure project, a relative $50,000 or $100,000 project, you don't want to spend months and maybe just as much money trying to do all the analysis to figure out whether or not you even spend the money. I mean, it can become ridiculous. And the whole point of this is try to give you a framework and parameters that allow those types of kind of decisions that you just have enough knowledge of your city about, where you don't have to engage in some long records-intensive data review. But that second portion would involve more review. None of this is mathematical. It's just, again, a list of factors, as Aaron explained. But in that second step, you would do some record keeping. Staff would say, this is the data we reviewed, and this was our conclusion from it. So there would be at least some data tracking and record keeping there in that second level of review. Anyway, so yeah, a better version, a more readable version of that is in your materials there. So again, some example factors to try to, we would actually recommend putting together a guidebook for how you apply that review with the water management district work that Aaron was pointing out. That's the way the water management districts do it. The language that she showed, there's a whole guidebook called the Applicant's Handbook that describes how the water management districts will determine each of those factors. And if you want to do that, these are some of the factors that would go into that and help you in understanding how do we make these decisions in any given case. So again, you have things like looking at, would it cause flooding on other parcels? What are the environmental impacts? What about effects on other infrastructure? When you build this, if you dramatically elevate it or harden it or make it larger, what is that? What are the other impacts of that? Elevation of adjacent properties. They're starting to have some pretty significant issues with this down in Miami Beach, where they've been elevating roads. They've got a lot of property owners that are pretty unhappy with now the fact the road is up higher than their house, and they're having some runoff issues. And
I met with a city at the League of Cities that was telling us exactly about that there's a berm, and so it's just flooding. There's another engineering group that's trying to fix that problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, because as much as nobody likes road flooding, they would probably prefer to have the road flood than their house flood.
Yeah.
And, you know, roads in Florida, there are a lot of communities in Florida where roads become the choice for how you deal with floodwaters. That's the storage area temporarily.
But you got to consider there's, land past your property owner. Apparently, the way they said, the road went like this, and then it just dropped off, and then the people were here, and so then it was just...
Yeah, I saw a message about some woman who fell off the berm in front of her house getting her mail. So, I mean, they're just things to think about before you run forward with it kind of stuff. Obviously, the amount of use of the infrastructure and who's using it might be things you want to consider. You're going to want to look at the future maintenance needs and costs. Aaron has been working a lot in Monroe County, and one of the things that their transportation department is concerned about is now they're starting to look at, when they elevate roads, they have to add stormwater drainage systems. Well, they don't do that in the Keys. Most of their roads, it's an island. It just runs off into the water. Now they're having to add this, and their transportation, the Public Works, they don't have people and trucks that do maintenance on that because they don't have any future costs that nobody's considering yet. So there are always those potentials. And of course, what is going to be the additional cost to design and build it? And, who's going to pay for that and why? And finally, of course, if that piece of infrastructure, how does it relate to other, is it necessary for other infrastructure to function? Say a road you might not want to elevate, but it turns out that that's the one road you're going to need, say, for evacuation from an entire area. Maybe you still want to do it. So finally, I guess what it comes down to is, we just have to face that this is going to be a moving target pretty much from now on. And it's always going to be changing. But of course, you are ahead of the curve compared to most local governments in the state, and we're really happy to see that and very excited about it. And I think it gives you the opportunity to develop more open and transparent policies to help people understand what they're going to be dealing with in the future. And of course, we hope that that can help protect the city fiscally and legally from some of the risks and pitfalls that I think are going to be coming down the road as people start seeing the real suffering and loss of property. So with that, I think we'll end and open it up for if there are any questions for either of us.
Questions from council?
Do you want, I already asked one.
No,
Do you want
go.
to- Okay, just a quick one. I guess it's more of a comment than a question with the guidebook you're talking about from the water management. I feel like, God willing, you're always going to be here. But my concern is that there could possibly be change in staff, and with that change in staff, a change of mindset of what is considered important or not important as far as the sea level rise and all that stuff. Does this put in the safety or the protection of what we're trying to do in the case of changing staff or council or that type of a thing? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's the whole point. And what the basis of review or applicant's handbook actually has is transparency for people that are coming in for a project. And a lot of times there are examples, like this is how we're going to interpret one of these factors. If you do this, yes. If you do no, that doesn't make sense. So that's the whole point. It's a pretty lengthy document. It doesn't have to be a lengthy document, but with the application of any of those factors, I think that you can clarify what the intent of the city is so people know how they're going to fare in that balancing test. That's the whole point of it.
I definitely feel like that's probably something we definitely want to do.
Because I think,
Sure.
like even right now, we do that, but very informally. Like we did that with the fire station, honestly. I mean, we did very much a balancing test to decide, did we want to rebuild here and have to redo it in 20 years, or do we want to just, move it now? So that was very similar, thinking. But I think what the guidebook does is give the public an expectation of how we are going to analyze things. And we get requests for projects every day. So, we had a lot of contacts over the past week with the rain about, hey, can you come look at my driveway? The water's getting into my garage. So what are, when we look at, and we had this conversation, is that really a priority in this area more than this? And in having something like that already out there, and we can hand that to the people and say, this is how we came to this conclusion. And so you're number 3, or, you're on the CPI or CIP for year 10 because, it didn't rank very high when we did our, analysis. And like, I talked to them, frequently when we were going through this, and in my head, I always called it like, is the juice worth the squeeze test? And that's kind of what, and really in the end, it is, but it's, when you have it laid out and clearly written, you basically give your staff and your future staff and the public a very laid out set of expectations and how you come to those.
At what point do we make the decision on taking that on? Would that be done at it's just
the next project? It's so it's an ongoing. This will never stop planning for sea level rise. I have to say that. I mean, after we get done with, for example, Thomas provided a draft for the notification to property owners that come in a flood zone in a coastal high hazard area, and we're reviewing that. And how to incorporate that in our building permits and things like that. So we're hoping to present that to you after the budget is approved. Okay. But that, so we get that done, and then we'll get the guidebook done, and then we'll probably be at the point where we have to do another vulnerability analysis to update the data. So it's a constant ongoing, item that we'll always be doing. So
The data will change as we get new data in.
It's
all the
changed
time, so that's,
from the last time.
it's going to be a
between
living
projects.
document that changes.
Well, the data may be, and the policies will at some point evolve, but I think the community, because it doesn't use specific data, it specifies what types of things to consider. So unless you discover through experience that there's something in there or something missing from there that you would like to be able to consider, that shouldn't have to change as frequently.
And then we're also exploring the idea of looking at our seawalls. You know, what do we need to do with, are there areas that would be appropriate to begin converting to a hybrid? And then also, you know, we have some areas of the city that we really need to repair our seawalls. And if we do repair them, do we raise them? If they have outfalls, do we put backflow preventers on them? So there's, you know, there's that constant stepping of, you know, data that we need to bring in and planning that we'll always be doing.
Any other from council?
The information that was presented on the policies tonight, is there anything that was presented today that was different than what's in this book?
No.
So it's the same stuff that we already read, and all we're doing.
That we
now-
gave you in the meetings that we had with you, yep. So
Okay.
you have that at
was-
home. Yeah.
That was, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything
Nope.
that.
Hasn't changed since.
It makes a lot more sense when you guys explain it than when we're reading it. I'm just going to say I appreciate it, because I mean, I read through it, and I'm kind of like.
I told him that too. I said, read it after you get the presentation.
Yeah.
You'll understand it more.
I already read it, and that's why I was, as it was going on, well,
I left mine in my
I
car.
already read this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so you did get copies of it a while ago.
Yeah.
We kind of went over, you know, how we were going to handle this meeting and then that they were going to present it to you. But yeah, so you have all that already.
I just wanted to clarify.
And we would put it online, but it's not ADA compliant, so I'm sorry. If you would like a copy of it, please let us know. We'll be glad to send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, that's everything?
Oh, Tara, did you want to proceed? No? Okay. Did you want to give an update on the compact by any chance? Yeah, come on up. So Tara's, the Regional Planning Council is working on the East Central Florida Climate Compact, and so she's going to give us an update on that.
Wrong words.
That's
Not
okay.
Collaborative.
Collaborative,
So, yeah, so it's the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Collaborative, and it came out of the Regional Resilience Action Plan that we did with Brevard and Volusia County and the cities about almost 2 years ago. So we have worked over the last about 8 months trying to move the collaborative forward, and Satellite Beach, thank you, was one of our first signers, you guys signing on as a partner. So I believe we have about 14 partners so far. It's going before Brevard County also shortly. So it's definitely moving forward. The signing ceremony will be, I think it's October 23rd. So someone from your city will come and officially sign the collaborative. And the new CRO, the State Community Climate Resource Officer, has confirmed her attendance at the signing ceremony. So it's great for our region and all of our partners. So.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. At this time, because it was a workshop, public hearing, open the mic for any public comment.
John Fergus, 135 Maple. There are 2 points. I've been working with Thomas for quite a while on some of these issues. 2 points I'd really like to stress. And they didn't talk about it when they talked about the test. You might want to ask some questions, I don't know. The courts look differently at something that is done administratively. If John Stone makes a decision on a permit, okay, they treat that differently than if you folks make a legislative decision involving something. And the point is, they're much more lenient with the legislative versus administrative, because there's 3 branches of government. You've got legislature, you've got operations like the presidency, and then you've got the judicial. And they're not supposed to meddle with each other. And so that's one thing to consider. It might put more of a burden on council at some points, but it's something to consider. And the other is Time is on your side. Do it early. If you're going to give a notice about what you're going to do, let's say if you can't repair a road, don't do it 6 months before you have to enforce it and say, we're not going to repair that road. Do it 30 years before that happens. Okay? And 30 years is kind of a nice number. That's the normal length of a mortgage. And so if you make a decision and then it goes through, the normal life expectancy of a mortgage or somebody living somewhere, whoever comes in after that can't complain. It was on the books when you bought the place. And so those are the two things, administrative versus legislative, and time, which means you might look at that and say, why do we need that now? It's 20 years out. That's the time to do it, 20 or 30 years out.
Thank you. Mic's still open? Any further public? Hearing no further public comment, close it. Back to council. Any further comment on the presentation? Hearing none. Courtney, anything else from staff? First, thank you, everybody. To the presenters, thank you very much for the hard work to get us here. I'm sure we're going to see this time to come.
You'll be seeing an ordinance format going to P&Z.
Great. Okay. Thank you. No further, then I'll adjourn this meeting. Council will start at 7.
I might run home and get my.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the City Council of Satellite Beach, August 21st, 2019, approximately 7:05. Please join Councilman Montanaro for a prayer and the pledge.
Lord, thank you for allowing us to be here this evening. Please be with us as we make decisions for our city. Be with our men and women in the military stationed across the world, and be with our first responders as they venture out on the streets of our cities and counties in the state of Florida. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Dominic. This time we're going to move a couple agenda items up. Apologize for this, but the fire department just they're on a run, and the people we need to be here are as protecting our city, they're out there. And so as soon as the call is over, we will proceed with the recognition of the fire department, the promotion, and so forth. So at this time, I'm going to move to agenda item 5, which is some presentations that we have. And the first one will be certificates from the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organizations. And this is to volunteers that did the Crosswalk Education Program. So Kim, thank you, and cheers.
Thank you so much, Council. It's such an honor to be here and to speak with you. We just want to thank you so very much for your partnership and your leadership in educating our citizens on the new crosswalks within the city and the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Liz and Courtney, we appreciate your leadership so much. This is very important from a safety perspective, and we need our citizens to really know how to use this sort of countermeasure. Satellite Beach is really leading the way in transforming the corridor to make it safer. And as the additional crosswalks are put in to the south, I think that it is really going to give us the tools that we need so that the Department of Transportation can lower the speeds and make it more of a complete street and just an asset to the community. So thank you very much, and we're going to hand out a few of the certificates.
All right. I think most of these names are easy, but if I mess up somebody's, I really apologize. So we're going to try and run through these. You'll see by the number of certificates we give out, this was quite an undertaking. So again, we really appreciate Satellite Beach and the effort you put to help us with this event. First is Judy Burgeon.
I don't think she's here.
Okay. Man Chan. Yu Chan. I was going to say they might go together. Doug Crescenta. Lucky them. Jim Gallo. Bill Little. Yay. Next up is Mike Lynch. Julie Pollinger. Pete Pollinger. Hannah Stramp. All right. Okay, now we're going to our police officers. Sergeant Eric Anderson. I know a lot of these folks said couldn't be here. Officer Eric Bell. Officer Jason Bergeron. Officer Austin, okay, here we go. Cocchiola. Was I close? Close. Lieutenant Darren Frost, I know he's here. Corporal John Houseman, I haven't seen him. Corporal Don Tribal. Officer Greta Valente Smith. Liz Allward. The Miss Satellite Beach, Linda Harlow. And Barb Holland. Okay. And again, we thank everybody and all the organization, and it was a great event. The partnership overwhelmed us with a full heart. I mean, it was just so cool. I mean, you guys even provided us water, so we didn't melt into the pavement. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to also thank you all for everything you did in helping us get that word out. So without that, we would have been on our own, and we felt very supported, and we really appreciate what you all did for us. So thank you.
And thank you, because it does make A1A a much safer place. If you drive that road, you cannot miss those lights. If you miss them, you shouldn't have a car. It's amazing how they stand out. And if you watch the reaction of people, and I heard everything from, everybody's going to get run over, rear-ended. I mean, I got to say, people pay attention to them, and they know what they are, and they slow down, and it's pretty interesting. And traffic doesn't slow up anymore than normal on that road. And I think it's a major thing for the city, because in all the surveys we did over the years, one of the big things has always been people wanted the ocean. They wanted us to buy as much property as we can. And the second thing that was always there was a safe crossing of A1A. So thank you very much for that. Moving on, I have a proclamation. Elizabeth Hugh, who's with the EDC, and Jennifer Sugarman, who's with Space Coast Defense Alliance Task Force volunteers. Come up there.
I didn't know my title was Miss Satellite Beach was being threatened.
I'm going to work really hard.
Ooh, did you see that look?
So, this proclamation is for the EDC for a Space Coast salute to our military bumper sticker campaign. I think they passed some of them out right here to us. So I'll read this. Whereas the Economic Development Council of Florida Space Coast, or EDC, is officially launching its new county-wide salute our military recognition campaign. And whereas Brevard County is home to Patrick Air Force Base, Cape Canaveral Air Station, the 45th Space Wing, Naval Ordnance Test Unit, Florida Air National Guard, the United States Coast Guard, and numerous military organizations and their families, who lend to the strength and engine that drives the economic and quality of life in Brevard County, Florida, and the nation. And whereas the EDC will spark an explosion of regional awareness and appreciation of our United States Armed Forces and their family members, who have an economic impact, of $1.1 billion in the Florida FY 2017. And military retirees residing in Brevard County who receive over $992.8 million in military pensions. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize, honor, and encourage the members of the United States Armed Forces to serve the United States. And whereas building partnerships between the public-private sector, our military personnel and their families solidifies our commitment of the United States Armed Forces in preserving freedom. Now therefore, I, Frank P. Catino, Mayor of the City of Satellite Beach, Brevard County, Florida, do hereby support the EDC Space Coast Salute to our Military Bumper Sticker campaign. And guys, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Could we get a picture of you holding up the bumper stickers? Because we have a social media campaign that goes along with this, and we want to do a social media salute from the city of Satellite Beach.
Do you want us to come down there or just here?
Just behind? Wherever you want. Well, I can see you, and we'll have Jen in the front. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Ready? I'll get closer so we can see the bumper stickers. Ready? 1, 2.
I'm going to look up the picture.
Come on, there. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
A true mayor, always looking at the agenda.
Looking at the next one. Sorry. We have one more, the presentation by 321 Millennials on the Millie, the Sea Turtle project. And Courtney, is that Mr. Nick?
Mr. Nick is with the Sustainability Board, and he is working with 321 Millennials to put this project in. So they're going to be presenting this idea to you tonight.
Yes, so may we approach the bench? We have some documents to hand out. Is that all right, Mark? So you're going to get 2 separate dockets. One is going to be just kind of a breakdown of what we're here to present. And then the second one, if you would stay on that first page and not spoil the second page, because I don't want to ruin that experience for you guys. But council members, Satellite Beach residents, and other residents of Brevard County, thank you for your time this evening, and thanks for putting us on tonight's agenda. So we are here, this up a little bit. 321 Millennials is our organization, and what we're here to do is present our second annual project, and we want to place it in Satellite Beach. And a lot of you out there probably heard Millie, and you're like, what the heck is Millie? So if you look at the packet, the first page of it shows you what Millie is not. And just clicking down direction. Okay. So a little bit about our organization. It's a nonprofit. Think of young professional organization that gets together on a monthly basis, and we really just try to strive for camaraderie in our area. It's a bunch of young professionals that really care about Brevard and want to make a difference. So 4 years ago, a few of us got together and said, let's create some impact. And over the last 4 years, we've created this amazing organization. The culture that we have just really been able to inject back into Brevard has been phenomenal, and I think has really reached further than what any of us ever imagined. In short, our mission statement is we're a group of young professionals who has made the Brevard our area where we live, and it's our #1 priority. And we want to see business and primary business goals secondary. Sorry, I'm butchering that all up. It's not normally what I say. And the way that we accomplish our mission is through a 3-tiered system. So we have the Connect Hub, which is essentially the networking leg of 321 Millennials. So once a month, we get together, we have meetings at either Pizza Gallery and Grill, or we go to Grills Riverside and have a conversation. We get together, we have maybe a speaker come in and talk about things that are happening in the county. We had Wayne Justice there last month, and we've had some really impactful people come in and really brief us on what's going on in the area. We have the cultural leg, which is kind of where we start to give back to the community, where the annual project actually fits in to our cultural mission, and then the charitable aspect, and that's where we get back to other nonprofits, whether it's helping them with campaigns that they're trying to promote, or get back to the community in ways like that. We do have a pretty large board. In the last 4 years it has grown. Tonight we have Mark, who is our membership chair, and I think a lot of you know Mark Boyd. We have Madison. She takes care of all of our marketing, our social aspects. And then Brian Bobbitt is not on the board, but he's a Keep Brevard Beautiful representative, and he is here helping us with this project.
Executive Director to you?
Yes. Congratulations.
And in the last few years, so we have been able to partner with, obviously, KBB. We've worked with Bridges. We've worked with Habitat for Humanity, Brevard Achievement Center, Hacienda Girls Ranch, the Haven for Children, the zoo. The list goes on. There's a lot of big organizations that have partnered with us and been able to collaborate on some really cool events. And so it was last year, It was actually the year prior is when we kind of thought about this concept, and we said, we have now a membership pool of 70 to 80 paying members that are paying on a recurring basis, so $120 a year. How do we take these funds and inject it back into the area? So we said, let's allocate some of those funds and we'll start doing an annual project. So on 3/21, so March 21st is when we do our annual membership event, which is very fitting for our group and the county's area code. So we get together and we basically propose 3 different objectives for our group to be able to accomplish. And so last year, if anyone has been in the Eau Gallie Arts District and you've seen these cornhole boards, it's on Highland Boulevard. These are metal statues that are permanently located in the Eau Gallie Arts District. It was a budget of $2,000, and we sourced someone out of Titusville, a local metalworks guy, and he put it together, and those are now permanently located in EGAD. We're able to work with the city, work with the Main Street down there in Eau Gallie, and then, of course, our organization will partner with a bunch of other people to do it. So the second annual project that we're trying to do, 2019, we had a few different proposals out there, and of course on March 21st, this was the one that took it over, and the proposal was Millie. So it is a large recycling receptacle that is going to be in a prominent location in Brevard County. So Goby was what kind of inspired this, and I think Madison actually was the one that brought it to the table. And so if anyone has seen Goby or knows what Goby is, it's essentially this huge fish that's in Indonesia, and it was a way for the locals to start recycling, to make the children have fun recycling these items. So that is a huge fish that is on the beach. As you can see in there, it's actually constructed out of rope and some other sustainable material, but as you can see, it's just filled to the gills, literally, of recycling material. So we took that and said, how can we do that in Brevard County? So we started throwing some different concepts and some different ideas together, and that's when a sea turtle kind of surfaced, and the location of Satellite Beach, Pelican Park was exactly where we wanted to do it. So we have a budget, and if you guys look at this single sheet, you can kind of see the parameters that we have going on with it.
Single sheet.
The single sheet. Yep.
Don't turn the page.
Do not turn the page. So the single sheet at the top says 2019 annual project proposal. So the proposal is a large recycling receptacle located at Pelican. And the budget that we've allocated from our organization is $2,500. We're not asking for any funds from the city. We have a full budget to move forward with this. We already talked about the location. We chose Satellite Beach. Obviously, Brevard County, everyone knows 72 miles of coastal whatever. Satellite Beach really resonated with us for multiple reasons, but primarily because Satellite Beach feels like a truly local beach. It's an ideal location for something like this, and we felt like you guys would be really on board with it. And we've got some amazing people that work with us that were just saying Satellite Beach has got to be the spot. It felt right. You guys have had it the first way. This is the first time we've presented this to anyone in the county, and we wanted to offer it to you first. The shape and name, so it's a sea turtle. I feel like that's very fitting for the area. And then the name Millie. So yeah, it's short for millennial, but it also is just kind of like a fun name to say, and I think it could really catch on with some just social media traction, and people are going to love saying Millie, which just sounds great. So as far as maintenance, these are some of the items that came up 2 months ago during our sustainability board meeting. So there were some objections that were proposed, and so one of them was, how are you going to keep up with the maintenance? Who's going to essentially empty the receptacle? And so that's Brian Bobbitt and his team at Keep Brevard Beautiful. We have worked with them, and the current, I'm not going to call it a contract, but the agreement is on a monthly basis, is the plan to take the recycling material outside of Millie. Manufacturing side, so like I said, we have a $2,500 budget. We are currently working with the legendary local surfboard shaper, Mr. Sam Barker, amazing gentleman. I was hanging out with him today, as a matter of fact, and I have some really cool props to show you guys. But he agreed to get together and help shape what the turtle is going to be. We also had different proposals out there working with Satellite Beach students as far as the art aspect of this, because not only is it going to be something that's used for recycling, but it also has to be a very cool, monumental, awesome artistic piece. So there's lots of moving parts with this. We talked about lifespan. It's hard to say how long something's going to live, and I think I'm shortening it by saying 5 years, but 5 years will be our commitment. We do have a budget that is set aside for preventative maintenance on an annual basis. So for those of you that do any PM work, our PM is going to be a 1-year recurring market on that. And then we've allocated $500 on that. And that's preventive maintenance, whether it's replacing some of the material, if it needs some new coating from the shaping side of it, whatever it may be, we are agreeing to do that. And of course, it will be removable. It's something that we realize that we do have sustained winds that time to time do hit the county, and so it will obviously be removed because we don't want to fly and sea turtle as a missile in the area. So a couple things. Share with you guys. So, may I approach?
I know what that looks like.
What do you say about Mr. Barker? Just say he
Oh,
was
God,
working
here we go.
really hard and sweating hard.
He was. He was
So,
covered in
thank you.
material.
Just don't, that poor guy.
So this is
Now I'm going to have to hear about Legendary.
So that was what we're going to make out of, and this is a prototype. So I'll pass that around to give you an idea.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I
So
like that. Little
the concept is going to be, we're going to build, it's not anatomically correct, so for those of you that are going to hit me on that, I promise you, you're going to win. So the idea is we're going to shape it out of surfboard material. So it's that foam. It's going to be, I think we're looking at 4 feet deep. We're looking at a 7-foot base on it. The entire thing will be that foam material. We're going to shape it just like a surfboard. We're going to paint it just like an artistic piece of art, and then we're going to glaze it just like a surfboard would be. And we're going to put a couple coats of resin on that to make it so strong. I mean, anyone could punch it. You know, it's very difficult to. Sorry, do you have a question?
No, I
Oh,
just
sorry.
love it. No.
So the body's going to be the surfboard material, and then underneath we're like, well, how are we going to catch the actual recyclable? So if you look at the mouth, there's actually a hole that is drilled through, and it goes at a 40-degree angle inside the belly of that netting material, and then just so happens to be a wine cork that is in there right now to show you the idea of the concept. That'll be eventually down the road. That's going to be 15, 20, 30 times larger than that. It'll be mounted with a 4x4 post that's removable, and it's going to be somewhere between that 30 and 40-degree angle to allow gravity to really fill the belly up. So that'll be there. The idea is to kind of get some signage involved to really educate everyone on what can be recycled and what cannot be recycled, and to make it kind of like a really cool showcase piece on the beach. And that's basically all I have on that. So open to questions, suggestions.
Can you turn the page?
ideas. Yeah, okay. So now we're ready. So that second page is the original concept that I was told not to share with you guys because my artistic skills are not good. So,
Courtney,
yeah.
I
So
think it's
did
great.
Sam draw this?
No, I did that. That's wholly me, and I will not be painting the
Good answer.
turtle. Yeah, that is not my job.
No, I was just opened up for comment from council.
What's the mesh going to be made out of? Is it?
So we're debating concept on that. I would like to use a sustainable material, so we pitched everything from an old fishing net, sailboat material, it could be rope. I mean, we're really going to get creative on that side of things.
Okay.
We're not 100% determined on anything. We've even talked about making a rib cage out of like a coated chicken wire material. But, we have a few different options out there, but it'll be something that you can see through, something to allow drainage for water, so it's not retaining water, and something that hopefully will withstand the salt spray.
In the event of a hurricane, you guys come get it off the beach, or what happens? I just hate to see it get washed away or torn up or whatever. I mean, what's the plan with that?
So the plan is it'll be installed, so right through the belly of Millie is going to be a 4x4 post, and it's going to go all the way up through the resin and all the way down, and that's going to be a removable piece. So if you think about like a tow hitch on your truck, if you're doing a trailer,
Yeah.
it's a couple times larger than that, and so it's going to sit in there, we'll lock it in, and if a hurricane, we're going to have notice of that, and that's where we've coordinated with Nick as far as relocating Millie from the beach and putting her into some shelter.
I think it's a great idea, but.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
I love this idea. I just think this is one of those things that just sets Satellite Beach above everybody else. Just all these awesome ideas. But where's it going to go at Pelican?
So
Up
we're
in by the park or down on the beach or?
by the park, where the concrete slab is and whatever, Nick,
Would you like me to give it more?
yeah, please?
So after talking with Cassidy at RAG, the location will be just south of the bathrooms. There's currently I think it's called a solar belly recycling there, along with some of the recycling signage that we already created. There's a little grassy area. So if you can imagine that when you walk off the boardwalk and you're going to throw your trash away anyway, and the recycling is right there, you have that other option. It will take up a little bit of room. So when we have Ocean Reef Beach, I've already talked to Cassie about the impact on those vendor spaces, and everybody's on board with the location being there.
Right. So Courtney, really just need, I mean, this is really an in-house thing too, just, we don't need a vote, just consensus?
We would need your consensus, yeah.
Consensus, guys?
So we-
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for choosing us, and thank you for doing something like this, because if you go there is a lot of plastic. A lot of it, so.
It's truly an honor to be able to kind of work with Satellite Beach and be able to make something really, I think, remarkable and unique. And I've done some research, and there's nothing on the East Coast that I was able to track down. So this would be very unique to not only Florida, but the entire East Coast.
Great.
Thank you
Thank you.
for bringing it to us. We've always been innovative, and this is just another example of you guys bringing something to us that's a first time.
Nikki?
Council, before they leave, if Brian and Bob would like to come up and talk to us a little bit about the KBB partnership in this and the role they'll play, and how we'll be able to actually track some of our plastic consumption and reduction for the community.
Yeah, thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
You know, as we all know, Keep Brevard Beautiful is very prevalent in Cocoa Beach. As of yesterday, I became the executive director of Keep Brevard Beautiful. Thank you.
Congratulations.
And, you know, when Shane came to us about this, we decided absolutely we would love to be involved because we'd like to expand our influence countywide. So this was a good opportunity. The plan is our crews are already going to be in the area because, fingers crossed, we're going to be cleaning up 192 and O'Galley Causeway is coming up here very shortly. And that's going to be on a weekly basis. So our crews are already going to be in the area. We're just going to come by on our way home from the day whenever Nick calls us and gives us a little heads up that she's getting full. Our crews will take the recycling out of Millie. I think we're going to take it to Public Works or
DRS Rec Center.
Okay, the rec center, where our crews who are trained in what's recyclable, what's not, what's contaminated, we'll sort it and then we'll dispose of it in a proper way that is the best way to do everything. So, I mean, really, when 321 came to us with this, it was like, yeah, of course we would love to be involved with something like this. And with Nick, with all the support of the city and everything else. We're just looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great event for years to come. It's going to be educational, and that's one of the main things that KBB wants to push is education for behavioral change. So y'all can be leading the way in that.
So, Brian, I just wanted to say that you brought the other good news about O'Galley and 192 getting done. And is that through the TDC grants that you got for the other causeways?
Yes, they voted through, and there's some things that are going on, and there's going to be another meeting still has to go through the board, but fingers crossed, it's looking very positive. I don't want to jinx anything, but it looks like it's probably going to happen.
Would you like us to send support letters or anything for
We
you?
would love that.
Okay.
If you can send to the TDC board members, that would be outstanding.
We'll
We'd
be glad to do
appreciate
that.
it.
Thank you for doing that. That, we see firsthand how bad those causeways are, and it's great that you're moving up, south, or moving south.
Absolutely.
And thank you for doing this partnership, and congratulations on your
Well,
promotion.
thank you very
It's
much.
very well deserved.
And just to kind of fill it in a little bit, we've been doing 528, and we've been doing 520 for the past year through the TDC grants, and have removed over 14,000 pounds of litter from those two causeways. When the grant cycle came back up, we wanted to expand. We asked for 192 O'Galley Maxburg Bridge to be included to it, and we scored very high. So we're thinking positive, and regardless whether that comes through or not, we're excited to be part of this program. So we'll be in Satellite helping out with Melanie no matter what.
And I served on the beach committee when we created that grant program, and we included litter control largely because of the things that we saw when we were down on O'Galley and seeing the litter going into the lagoon. And then we got that report that was done, I believe it was done by UCF, that showed that the lagoon had the highest concentration of microplastics of any water body in the state of Florida. So, that program, you guys really jumped on that opportunity to do all the causeways, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And one of the big things about the causeways is, you get the bulk material from people that are fishing and spending the day out there instead of going to the beach or on the causeway. But if you really go down and dig in and look, all you see is bits of microplastic. It's not sand, it's not rock.
No.
The majority is just ground up bits of plastic from the years of use. So that's one of the things that our crews are trained to focus on. It's cool to have the big bag of trash that you're removing, but when you have just a bucket full of microplastic, I'm just as happy with that. So.
I have a question. Well, like O'Galley's I run O'Galley every day of the week, and I pick up garbage when I do it. So I'm like the crazy running lady with plastic in my hands, and I've had people message me. But will you guys be putting, one of my biggest complaints at running this bridge all the time is what would be really nice to see, and I've been trying to find out who to talk to, is getting garbage cans at the base of the bridge where the fishermen, they go down and up, and would that be something you guys would work, or are you just strictly picking it up?
We're going to have a crew that's going to come down with a motorized vehicle. They'll cruise the
Okay.
causeway. They're going to probably hit 192 in Nogales the same day just because it's not the length of what 528 or 520 are. But they're just going to ride around the vehicle. They're going to pick up the equipment. They're going to get out of the vehicle. They're going to work the mangrove line, get in the rocks, and get all the little bits of microplastic that they see. So it's going to be a very thorough cleaning at least once a week. And I mean, we're excited to start working in this area of the county, so.
Great.
Thank you.
very much. And,
Thank you for this, too. It's great.
This is great.
Thanks for
Perfect.
Millie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Millie's awesome.
Thank you, and
Do we
support
have
you
an
in any way we
ETA?
can.
So-
I'm not sure about the legendary thing here, though, because I'm going to have to hear that when I get home.
Yeah,
for
I'll
like
tell you all
2
about
or
it.
3 weeks.
Thank you for that.
So,
Yeah, no, he's
yeah.
amazing, he's cool. Estimated time of completion, we're really looking December to get her done, and
Ocean Reef Beach Festival would probably be the best time to unveil it.
Ooh,
If
yeah.
you could all be there for a ribbon cutting in front of Millie, that'd be fantastic. We also have the KDB South Chapter team, which I'm a part of, has agreed to do a beach cleanup specifically to engage people with Millie at the same time.
That's great, I love it.
Probably have a lot of other great events going on at the Ocean Reef Beach as well. This will just be cherry on top. So thanks again to you and your team.
That's awesome.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
now, part of my ignorance, that's good, we're good to go? or is
You're
this
great
okay?
to go.
Oh, okay, all right. Very formal, I like it.
Just keep saying nice things about Sam, and you'll be fine.
That's all I had to do?
He is a legend in his own time, though. You know that.
In his own mind.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Okay. At this time, let's come back to agenda item 4. Chief, you ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So tonight is the event that we don't get to have that often in the fire department because people tend to stay for long periods of time. But tonight, we're going to recognize and promote and swear in Rhiannon Iverson as our newest captain. If she did, oh, there she is. Come on. You're blending very well. I'm going to swear her, and then we'll get on to some other people and talk about a couple other things. So, raise your right hand. I, Rhiannon Iverson, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, the State of Florida, the City Code, City Ordinances of the City of Satellite Beach. That I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of Fire Captain of the City of Satellite Beach. Very good. Okay, with that-
The first lady fire captain in the city?
She's our first
Yes.
female firefighter for the city, or first female fire captain for the City of Satellite Beach. That is
Woo-hoo.
true. So the first person that's going to make her bleed by pinning the badge on her is going to be her mother.
No.
So, Mom, would you step up? Okay, in tradition of the fire service, she now changes her helmet color to a red helmet, which is a new helmet provided for her.
On behalf of the Satellite Beach Fire Department, I'd like to present you your red fire captain.
I'd just like to say thank you for everyone for coming and showing up for my special day. I appreciate it, and I just hope I can live up to everyone's expectations and do a good job for you.
So Rhiannon started with the department in 2005, and she started as a reserve. And in 2007 is when she was hired as a firefighter EMT, and she went through and began her career as far as a firefighter EMT and progressed as a firefighter paramedic. When did you start as an acting officer? Oh. Yeah, so probably 5-7 years ago, she's been an acting officer, she's done that. Part of that process in the fire services is that you'll see on the agenda, it speaks of an acting officer, her moving from that position to the position of captain. In the fire service, we have the firefighters and we have the acting officers who will act in the place of a captain in the absence of a captain due to vacation, sickness, or absence from station. So Rhiannon has done very, very well to get where she has. Now, I also want to bring up and recognize Nick Walsh. And Kevin Duclos. Now, these two gentlemen have progressed to the position of acting officer. They go through the same testing process, the same stress, the same studying as Rhiannon does. But they will now be acting in the official capacity of an acting officer. And they've done very, very well. Now, what I'd like to tell you is that the three of them have worked very, very hard to get where they are, which they have. But the beautiful part about our department is that every one of our firefighters here tonight and that are not here tonight work very hard every day for you guys. And that's a blessing we have for the fire department because they do a great job. Nick Walsh, really, he started as a reserve in 2013. In 2014, he became our first part-time fire inspector. If you look at him, he looks, as you commented, think about him walking into your business and having a conversation about fire codes. And he did an excellent job. Kevin Duclos started as reserve in 2011 and was hired in 2013. So a majority of the people here of the fire department start in our department as reserves. They start by giving you their time to get where they are today. So we're very blessed to have them. So with that, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Congratulations and thank you.
Rhiannon, I just wanted to say real quick, we're really proud of you. And I know that you probably don't put a lot of stock in the fact that you are the first female fire captain in the city, because that's just not your personality. But I want you to know that it matters a lot to the girls that we're raising, and we're very, very proud of you. So, great job. You already are.
You were an inspiration to me when I was a fireman for a day.
Dave, you have something?
I'd just like to tell you, my brother-in-law last Thursday had a heart attack. I took him to the fire station. Rhiannon's crew was on duty. They handled it superbly. They called in a stimulator. By the time we got him to the emergency room in the ambulance, they knew who he was. They knew why he was there. They took him immediately to a room. They swarmed him. The doctor was there in less than 2 seconds. He went straight up to the cath lab. He got 2 stents on Friday. He got another stent on Monday, and he came home yesterday.
Right.
That's great.
This department is the greatest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you guys very much. Moving on, or back to agenda item 3, which is citizens' comments for non-agenda items. Non-agenda items.
Well, if I...
Oh, no.
I'm Diane Douglas. If I hit an agenda item, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Okay. I just have my things that I bring up.
Right.
Okay.
So if you hit an agenda item, I'm going to stop you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
That's
thank
fine. Okay. I just want to say no tax on the water. Okay. That's all. Okay? You were talking about for the budget, and you had mentioned that you might tax water.
No.
So, okay, good, because I don't want to tax on water. So, yay, that one's easy. Okay, let's see. And then I wanted to do, I just wanted to plant the seed of VOCs, volatile organic compounds. Smells are just combinations of volatile molecules. And, but now life requires learning that the scent of newly applied paint or of distinct aroma in just bought cars comes from volatile man-made chemical compounds which act like low-grade toxins in our body and should be avoided. Okay, so all the smells from your laundry detergent and dryer sheets are carcinogens, just so you know. They're going up in the air, they're going down in the water. That's all I'm doing, is planting a seed. So the more people who know not to use scented laundry detergent and dryer sheets, the better for everybody. So I know some people are upset about the cancer that's in the water that's from before, but we're still putting toxins and poisons in what we're doing now. So if we can address that. Okay, let's see, that's 3. And the town project, I'm against the 45-foot height thing unless there's proof that they're going to do the stormwater, improvements.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could do a 35-foot, keep it, and do the variance for each project. But then when we have a whole bunch of those coming in, then we could change the code. That's my thought on that. Okay.
That's kind of how we're designing it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so.
I didn't get that.
You gotta
from the
earn
thing.
it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's all I have. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Further public comment? Hearing none, close the citizens' comment portion. Move on to agenda item 6, city council comments. Mindy?
I attended the annual conference for the Florida League of Cities, and the governor came out and spoke kind of as a surprise, and I really liked a lot of the things that he said that he was planning on doing and the things that he has done. I really didn't realize how much he did for the Panhandle after the hurricane. He really pulled some strings and got a lot of money for them and some assistance that wouldn't have happened, and there's cities there that probably would be way worse off right now. So that was kind of good to hear. I know nobody's perfect, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I'm not going to agree with that he's doing, but that was a good point, Governor DeSantis. I attended a racial resiliency sort of symposium, and it was quite an interesting, I thought I would go in and leave in about 30 minutes to go do the ADA one, and it ended up staying for the whole one. And it was quite interesting, the perspectives, a very diverse group of people in there, and there were some things that we could probably talk about, and bringing diversity into the city that's more, not your typical what you hear on social media and that type of stuff. And had a lot of fun, witnessed a woman fall down the escalator, which was the funniest and most horrible thing all at the same time. It was very strange, but this is public record. I should stop. Anyways, great. I'm glad to be home. Yes, I'm done.
I also attended the annual conference, and the governor wasn't an unexpected speaker. He wasn't even on the agenda. He spoke for 45 minutes and kind of threw the whole general session right off because there were other meetings that were after that, and I went through several of the committees that I sit on, the legislative resolutions, nominating, advocacy, and our new second vice president is Randall Henderson. He is the mayor of Fort Myers, so he's going to eventually become the president of the Florida League of Cities in like 2 years. So it was a good conference. There was a lot of good information shared.
Thank you. Mark?
Just 3 things. Number 1, I just want to thank the mayor, the council, and Courtney and Gwen for the flowers on behalf of my mother-in-law's passing. That was very, very kind of you guys to do that. Very much appreciated. We were both very surprised by that, but it meant a lot to my wife, me also, but it really touched her. So thank you. Second thing is that I attended the Florida League of Cities meeting as well. The one I found that was really interesting was the one on Thursday afternoon with the local government websites and the ADA compliance. I had no idea it was that involved. I know you've mentioned it here, and that I haven't talked with you about it, but that's an animal to overtake, whatever. It's just a lot of work, and
We're spending a lot of money.
yeah, I can only imagine that it's costly, but that was very informative as far as I was concerned. The last thing that I want to mention is that, as you know, about a year from now, Frank and I will be going off council. And one of the things that we've worked on for the last 10, 15, 20 years is this aging in place concept. And I've seen here lately that the cost for living in an assisted living facility now for one person, a fairly nice one, and there, it varies among the really nice ones, can be anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000 a month to live in these things. So, you know, the city's done a wonderful job with its Aging in Place initiative, because a lot of people, and I see it every day in various settings, that they just don't have that kind of money to live there. It really creates a lot of divisiveness within families trying to manage that. And then some of them say, well, we'll just go into hospice, and they go into hospice because they can't afford the money to pay those things. So my point with that is if, you know, we've done a lot of the great things. You know, a year ago at this time, we were working on the equipment for the park down there, and worked with Alan on that. If you guys have in this last year anything that that was assigned to me to come up with the equipment and do all that stuff with Alan. If you guys have any projects or tasks that you'd like me to take a look at, please let me know, or let Courtney know, and I'll be happy to take on something. I got about a year to do that. I will tell you that just still chairing the committee that I have for the Department of Health, there's no money coming out of Tallahassee, none. They canceled one of our annual meetings because of just financial reasons. And I will probably lose my positions with the DOH and DOEA in a year from now when I go off council. So my last shot at this for really getting access to anything and helping the city is within the next 27 months. I'm not looking for anything, but I just want to let you know that if there's anything I can do, please let me know, because my contacts will be terming out, and there's been some talk at the Tallahassee level that anybody that's been on a committee for greater than 5 years needs to get off. They're just terming everybody out. And so I will get, either if I don't get off as a result of not being on council, I'll get off because they're just going to toss us all off. So that's, I guess, you see where I'm going. If there's anything I can do to help next year, let me know. And I'm not looking for anything, but I'm offering if there's something there. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I attended the PAB meeting, which was very interesting, and I did have a report to Courtney concerning some comments on 27 acres that I think we need to have some education there. I also spoke in front of, what was it called, the COC?
The Citizens Oversight Committee, yeah.
Committee on Friday. Mark, just saying, piggyback on something you just said, the project that possibly could be going on Roosevelt, where we have that drainage, is it Jackson? Jackson. Excuse me. You know, we have, Jackson. So, hey, I just know where it is.
I was like, we're done with that. I don't want to do anything more.
Oh, no, sorry. On Jackson, you know, we have a lot of stuff in the south end of our city, recreation-wise, and this especially for, you know, the Aging in Place thing. You know, that maybe that if that stormwater pond becomes a reality by the baseball field there, where they want to take that out, that'd be good to put equipment around there too. I think it would get incredible amount of use. But
I don't think we're going to have the room there. Okay. Honestly, it's all going to go towards stormwater.
Okay.
And then the leftover room will go to batting cages like the principal wants.
All right. I was just thinking of there on that part of the, you know, we don't have that.
One of the good parts about that project, though, is we do have a lot of slip and falls in that area, and the new sidewalk will take care of a lot of that. So that's because of the Schechter Center, and we have so many, you know, older residents that walk there, and then they fall in that area. And that, unfortunately, the area doesn't, there's no liability on our part because it's pretty even, but it's not perfect. So, you know, having a brand new sidewalk will help that quite a bit. So that'll be a nice amenity, and we'll make sure that it's all ADA too, to have the new, you know, crosswalks and stuff like that inside.
Thank you. Any further, council? Okay. Thank you. City Attorney's report?
I have nothing.
We were going to present the short-term rental item, but we're going to wait till the next meeting, if you don't mind, because we're still working on some things, and we'd like to do a whole report at once, if you don't mind.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Moving on to City Manager's report. Courtney?
Thank you. We actually have the applications in for the Youth Council. The application period is open now, so we have that advertised, and we'll continue to advertise it on our Facebook page. We do have a couple applications already, which is exciting. Some informational items, our facility cleaning contractor has decided to stop services with the city, and that contract ended pretty abruptly. So we are rushing around nervously trying to, we are working on a short-term contract with ABM for 120 days until we can rebid that contract. So I just wanted to let you know that in that short-term contract will be under the bid threshold amount. So I'm just signing that just so we don't have a non-clean facility. It's difficult for us, especially with the Schechter Center, because it has to be cleaned, absolutely has to be cleaned every night. So I wanted to let you know that. We actually thought of this as a blessing in disguise personally, because we had a lot of problems with that contractor, and it just kind of pushed us to the point of having to rebid. So it is actually a good thing and a good opportunity to get a lot of the problems that we were having taken care of. The first meeting in the ad hoc committee for the fire station and public works design is scheduled for August 27th at 3 p.m. at City Hall if you want to attend that. So that's an exciting, you'll see some of the concepts for the site, and then the committee will have a chance to begin weighing on what kind of architecture they want, some of the landscaping ideas that they would like, and things like that. The Green Team had its first meeting on August 16th to discuss the city's initiative Become Single-Use Plastic Free, so I just wanted to make sure you knew that. It was moving down the line, and we're working hard to get that moving. The county did discuss the possibility of a moratorium on the application of biosolids on agricultural land on August, so that was yesterday. I spent most of the day there to support that initiative. They did end up doing a ban, but grandfathered in the existing landowners, so honestly it doesn't accomplish very much, but it does kind of send a message to the state that that's an issue that they're worried about. I think our county commissioner knew that I was a little upset that they grandfathered in, so I have lunch with him next week. Our very own Nick Sanzone was featured in the Melbourne Beachsider, and it was highlighting his work on the city's sustainability initiatives, and it dubbed him the Resiliency Ranger. So of course in City Hall behind his back we're saying the Ranger's coming down the hallway. So it is exciting to see our staff highlighted in the Melbourne Beachsider, and we thank George for doing that. The Melbourne Beachsider has become our go-to paper when we want to notify our residents of things, because they do work on our stories, and they may not see things the same way we do, so they don't do what we ask them to do, but they do publish stories for our area, which is important to us, and that we do press releases a lot, and Florida Today never publishes them. But Melbourne Beachsider is consistent in doing so we appreciate that out of them. The city staff is working with a new vendor to replace the playground at Pelican Beach Park. Cassie is awaiting your call, Ms.
I'm going to move
Gibson.
there on Friday.
And so we're looking at doing a really neat, different type of playground at that park. And then I wanted to let you know that the Satellite Beach United Methodist Park has been installed, and we're waiting on them to put the sign in and hopefully do a grand opening ribbon cutting so we can attend that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Council, questions for the city
I
manager?
rode my bike by the church up there. It looks great.
And then it?
Yeah, that's nice equipment. Yeah.
Could we just briefly go over the cyber attacks and all that, just to say that we are...
We are doing training with our staff. In fact, we did get a phishing email today, and we were able to...
Okay.
And we're partnering with Indian Harbor Beach on that, so we can minimize the cost.
Sorry, what was this for?
For cyber training, for ransomware attacks.
23 cities in Texas were held ransom yesterday or something. They were small cities, and
the training really focuses on the employees to recognize phishing emails. But we do have she got one today and recognized it and was able to not respond to that. So that's part of the training. The other side of it is just everything we're doing to prevent ransomware attacks, and that's basically people stealing our data. But we really can't tell you what we're doing in that. I can tell you separately, but in a public meeting it would be advisable for us to disclose how we're handling that. So.
Just for perspective, Fort Lauderdale got hit, and I think it was like upward of a couple $1 million or something that they held there. And they basically what they do is they get into your system and they hold your permitting department hostage, and they won't let it go. And you have to pay them basically money for them to release it for you.
Right.
So and then it all doesn't come back.
And then, yeah.
There was one city, that was one of our priorities in the policy committee that I sit on, is cyber security. and I think it's the number 2 priority out of that committee. So it's happening all over the state, and even the cities that paid didn't get all their stuff back because they're not giving it all back.
So we're on it. So for anyone out there listening, it's something that we're aware of, and we have a great IT guy, and he's getting used to me badgering him like every 2 weeks. I'll send him an email and be like, "Are you sure we're okay?" He's like, "Yes, we're fine."
We have Artemis under contract that does a lot of that for us. So we have a pretty a company that's got a pretty good track record in assisting. And then, so, we also, it's interesting, everything that we have done to prepare for disasters, natural disasters, has assisted us in preparing for this. So we're probably, luckily, and it was just out of, chance that we came out a little ahead than most other cities.
I was just going to piggyback on Courtney's talk about the youth council. We went to the youth council conference on Saturday, got some great ideas. Mr. Pruitt is going to add it in his weekly email for Satellite High. And Liz sent the press release to the Brevard Business News, so it's in this latest edition as well. So we're getting some good, getting it out there.
Great. Okay. Any further questions to Courtney? Courtney, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9, discuss, take action on I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, this is a public hearing. Let me just go back and just double check that here because it's not on the header. Yes. This time open up for public hearing, agenda item 9, discuss, take action on resolution 1016. Jim?
Resolution number 1016, a resolution of the City of Satellite Beach, Brevard County, Florida, imposing an annual stormwater utility assessment for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2019 against all real property within the city limits of Satellite Beach, Brevard County, Florida, providing classifications of property, providing for certification of annual stormwater utility assessment roll, providing an effective date. That's a reading of resolution number 1016.
Thank you.
Motion to approve resolution number 1016.
I have a motion by Councilman Montanaro.
Second.
I have a second by Councilwoman Gibson. Further discussion from Council. Courtney, anything to add to this?
We aren't raising the fee, so it's the same.
Same fee? Okay, at this time, open up for public comment on agenda item 9. Hearing no public comment. Back to Council. Further comment?
Councilmember Rozicki?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brimer?
Yes.
Councilwoman Gibson?
Yes.
Councilman Montanaro?
Yes.
Mayor Patino?
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, staff. Moving on to agenda item 10, the proposed agenda. Remember, proposed agenda for a regular meeting September 4th. So if you need anything else on it, please contact our city manager. One thing here just to add. I've been getting emails, as you have, if we can talk on the pet ordinance thing. She's bombarded me. So I know you got some. I got some other ones that I was copied on only. So
I would prepare a report for you for, she wanted to know how she should get information to you. I told her the best thing to do is to send it by email. So that's really, her effort trying to educate you on her research that she's done. And just to, Indian Harbor Beach did pass that ordinance. So I will send that out to you so you can see it. And they, oddly, they gave the pet store that's actually in their community 30 days to comply, and they have. Right. So they apparently took about 6 months to come around to that decision, but they eventually did do it. So I'll brief you individually, and she will want it to be brought to you as an agenda item. I asked her, why didn't you not include reptiles, considering the iguana population and boa constrictor population being such a hazard to the Everglades and to the state of Florida. And that's something that didn't occur to her, so she's going to go back and research it. So
I wrote her back and just said thank you for the education and sending the
So
stuff.
I would just read it, and then when she feels like she's sent enough to you, I'll get with you and we can decide how to handle that from there.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 11, adoption of minutes. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the special meeting on August 7th and the regular council meeting on August 7th as submitted.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Rozicki. Any further discussion?
Councilman Gibson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Breimer?
Yes.
Councilman Ruzicki?
Yes.
Councilman
You
Montanaro?
can have that one.
Yes.
Mayor Patino?
Yes, motion passes.
Can you pass it down to
Is there any
the mayor?
further business before council? Any more questions from council? Hearing none, meeting's adjourned.
Mayor.